So I'm going to talk a little bit about the work that I do mostly in Kruger. I work as a social scientist for sandparks and been doing that for about 15 years or so. I don't think I'm a very good scientist. I do a lot of applied kind of projects, but just going to share some of those stories with you this morning. But just to start off at a rather large scale, I guess, this is the matterscape. This is the truth. Where is the biodiversity across the globe? And I think the Brazilians will sort of identify with this, that a lot of it is sitting around the equator, around the middle over there. But what makes this quite interesting is that's also where the highest levels of inequality are across the world. And this certainly is the case in South Africa. Over there, we've got one of the highest levels of inequality. But what this means in reality is that there's a vast majority of the world's biodiversity in developing nations, and rural people live alongside endangered and rare species. And they're going to use these species for their livelihoods, which is, of course, going to have an impact on biodiversity conservation and the way in which we manage it. So it's really up to us whether we see that as a threat or an opportunity in terms of making sure that protected areas persist for the benefit of people going forward. So in South Africa, biodiversity, one of the ways in which we respond to threats to biodiversity is through protected areas, and that's the same across the globe. But many of them are under threat, and we know this through a lot of the amazing work that's been done. And there's sort of the 6 main threats to protected areas in South Africa. But there's one that kind of doesn't always get spoken about, and I sort of call it the seventh threat, and that's loss of value. We heard a little bit about it yesterday, and when I'm saying value, it doesn't mean necessarily monetary value, but it's the way in which people perceive the importance of protected areas. And that, of course, has got to do with how they engage with them and have engaged with them in the past and the opportunities that they see for the future. So that's, of course, a little bit of a concern for us, but it's also a concern because, as we also heard yesterday, that protected areas are not only sort of losing value amongst society in certain situations, but they're also expected to do more for society. And these are both quite big factors that are going to drive the way in which we manage protected areas going forward. Oops. So of course, when we are managing protected areas, people have to benefit from them. It's because it's our mandate, that's what they're there for. There's an intrinsic reason to conserve biodiversity, but we've also got to make sure that biodiversity is being conserved for people at the end of the day as well. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, but I think it's also making sure that you are able to manage protected areas in a way that you promote connections, build relationships, so that you can build value, and people have then developed a vested interest in the persistence of these areas for their own, for the sustainability of themselves as well as the protected area. So a lot of the discussion is around well-being. So if we talk about what well-being is, we do benefit sharing through the concept of well-being, and I think this is a really important concept to understand, and Steph gave a really lovely introduction to it yesterday. But it's really a state of mind and body, and that's the important thing. It's mind and body, and it encompasses happiness, harmony, and peace of mind. And there's a lot of different sort of components to well-being that I'm sure many of you are very aware of, and we heard about some of those yesterday. So there's tangible components of well-being, having food, having enough shelter, having water, feeling good, feeling well, being healthy. There's emotional well-being components, which are really important, having self-respect, feeling good about yourself, social well-being, being able to care for your family, feeling safe, as well as having the freedom to choose. So what's interesting about all of these different dimensions of well-being is that a whole lot of them are actually intangible. So we kind of, it's fine, it's easy for us to measure all the tangible stuff, but all of these different things here are relatively intangible. And the interesting thing about that is that often they actually make up a larger fraction of the complete well-being basket, but we don't sort of talk about them and we don't always measure them. And of course, well-being, there's positive and negative impacts on well-being. So there'll be costs and benefits related to all those different components of human well-being. So what we really sort of have acknowledged quite recently is that understanding the impact of protected areas on human well-being is really important. It's a really important tool for being able to sort of make sure that these protected areas are going to be sustainable going forward. So the other important context when we're talking about this kind of stuff is, of course, history. And we know that the historical impact of protected areas on human well-being is going to shape the perceptions that people have. So this is a photo taken from a very long time ago in Kruger, where I work. And in the early days, that's really what the park was about. You know, it was kind of it was fenced off, and the elite in South Africa, or the people that were able to travel to the park and had vehicles and so on, were able to come and visit. So I was one of those, and I've been privileged in that I've been able to access the park from a very young age through my parents, and in so doing, build a very strong connection to the place, and that's kind of why I do what I do today. But that's not the case for the majority of South Africans, and it hasn't been. And that's really the context within which we try and do a lot of the programs, certainly within the Kruger and within the sort of Savannah node. But I think what's also important is that the Kruger didn't just start sort of in 1926, and people were part of that landscape for a lot longer than that. And we know that through all the cultural heritage records that we have. So humans have been part of this landscape for a very long time, and often we talk about Kruger as being a kind of pristine wilderness without people, and that's the kind of protected area model that many people sort of look at and want to try and maintain, but that's certainly not the case. People have been using resources within these landscapes for a very long time, and that would have shaped the kind of natural environment that we see today. So I guess what we're saying is that it's really important to acknowledge our past. It may shape us, but it doesn't define who we become. So I'm going to just share some of the stories on, you know, some of these sort of transformation stories that we've been trying to, I suppose, grapple with over the years. Not always that easy, but lots of positive things. So yesterday at the lovely session that Wendy ran for us in the forest, there was a term called toxic positivity, and I think sometimes I suffer from that. But hopefully we'll provide a little bit of a balanced view. So there's lots of different projects and programs that aim. Can you hear me if I hold it here? Righto. So many different projects and programs that are aimed at sharing benefits. I'm not going to go through all of these, but just to know that this is the kind of framework that we use to cluster the way in which we impact on society. And sometimes it's positive, sometimes it's negative. So negative in the term of things like human-wildlife conflict, for example, and there's programs that are aimed to manage the impact of that. There's programs aimed at sharing ownership, all sorts of ecosystem services at the top here. Employment, obviously a very big one. Lots of people needing employment, needing jobs through protected area management and so on, capacity building, infrastructure support. But the one that I'm going to start off, because it's kind of a feel good, and we heard a little bit about it yesterday. George gave us a nice introduction to Mopani worms. And this was just a project that was started in Kruger in 2010 with the idea that, we were trying to look at different ways of being able to share benefits from biodiversity within national parks, moving away from the protectionist approach to conservation and engaging with people in culturally appropriate ways to try and promote these positive connections with the long-term idea of sustainability, both ecological, social, and economic sustainability. So this is one of those projects. The objectives were to be able to share benefits in the context of well-being benefits, so all those tangible and intangible things, build relationships, try and address some of the perception issues that are existing in the landscape because of the history, and then try and promote relevance and build relevance through tangible things as opposed to trying to sort of push things down from the top. So we were able to do some nice work on this and document all the different components of well-being that were impacted as a result of the harvesting of Mopani worms. So there's the material and physical. And then we also were able to record some really nice positive impacts on psychological and emotional well-being. So these are the things that actually are really important and really relevant in the context of some of these discussions. So if you're just talking about the tangible, it just seems like one tiny little thing. We could have collected the Mopani worms ourselves and gone and given them to people. But because people were actually able to come into the park and harvest them themselves, we've got all these other additional impacts. So things like creating a sense of optimism, happiness, hope, and learning new things. Meeting new people, lots of social impacts as well. Social is a very big component of psychological well-being. Building new social networks, building social connectedness. Security and freedom of choice. So all these different dimensions were impacted on that we were able to measure. And that just shows you how by ignoring the intangibles, you actually miss a huge component in terms of the benefits. And that's kind of where the conversation was going, I think, on the first day when we spoke about the monetary value of biodiversity and how important it is to actually look at it in a much broader sense, because otherwise you do undervalue it, okay? In terms of relationships, lots of different impacts on that. But I think the important thing is that it's really just a new way of doing conservation and allowing people to sort of engage and connect with protected areas in a different way. So the take-home message from here, and this is sort of where the whole conversation of it's not about the started. So it's not just about the worm, and that's really the point. It's not just about the worm, it's about all these other different impacts that happened as a result of the worm almost being a sort of an opening opportunity to be able to start some of these projects. So the next one I'm going to talk about is an employment project. So this is the environmental monitor program that was implemented all over the country. I looked at a subset of environmental monitors in the Kruger Canyon biosphere, and the idea of the program was to support conservation organizations, both in terms of capacity, but then also address unemployment. So the objectives were biodiversity as well as human well-being related, and also did some quite detailed impact assessments on the environmental monitors over time. But just to show you again, there's a whole big basket of stuff that comes out when you ask the right questions. So obviously very positive impact on material and physical well-being, psychological and emotional well-being, people getting, honestly, people, getting jobs has got the most incredible impact on people in society in many of these areas. I mean, we can't undervalue the role that employment can play, and it's not just about the money, it's about all these other things, being able to provide for your families and the self-respect that you have, that you're able to then have money and make decisions around that kind of stuff. So we were able to document lots of different impacts as a result of this program, just to kind of say again that it's not just about the money. Okay, so all sorts of impacts there. Of course, negative impacts as well. So the ones in red are the negative impacts. Always remember, you've got to remember that there's always going to be trade-offs between costs and benefits at a number of different levels, and it's quite important to be aware of those. Used to babysit my siblings, but now there's no one to babysit. So that's been quite a big thing. Obviously, we pushed with transformation to employ women, and a lot of women are now, they're these sort of knock-on impacts that are sometimes contribute negatively at a household level. So important as protected area managers just to be aware of that sort of thing. Okay, so other impacts there. This was quite a good one. I'm just going to go back there quickly. So the part I like least about my job is doing the same thing over and over again. And I like doing different things that challenges my mind. So this came out as quite a big issue with the program. And I think if you think of a lot of the EPWP projects, so where people are employed, it's an employment project and they've got to go and do kind of mundane type of work and not always sort of looking at the bigger picture and understanding how what they're doing contributes to something important, it can result in some of these types of negative impacts. And I think, as protected area managers, it's quite important to remember this kind of thing, that when people are doing boring stuff, it doesn't contribute positively to their workplace well-being. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that just now and why that's important. Also, well-being dimensions are linked, so it gives me great fulfillment that I can help my family financially. So just to say that these different well-being dimensions are not just independent of each other. Okay, so this is a little bit tiny. Not that tiny. I've never worked with such a big screen. It's quite cool. I think some of my font is enormous. So we were able to then plot those dimensions on a graph, so to be able to give a snapshot view of positive versus negative. So those are the different well-being dimensions over there, and the percentage of respondents. Those are positive responses and negative responses to the different well-being dimensions. So just nice to be able to, as a snapshot, say, okay, well look, generally for this project at an individual level, family level, and community level, there seem to be more positive than negative impacts on well-being as a whole. So I think what this means, I just want to kind of put this in context in terms of well-being of staff generally. Workplace well-being is a combination of psychological and physical well-being. It's influenced by a whole lot of different factors. When there's a high workplace well-being, when people are valued, they feel like they're contributing to something important. I mean, we all know what that feels like. When there's nice teamwork, where there's good social interactions, then you get increased productivity. That's just how it is. That's how it works. You also get increases in a thing called organizational citizenship behavior. Has anyone ever heard of that before? It's quite a long one. Don't try and say it too fast. But what it really means is that your staff are going to act in the interest of the organization. And that's quite important when you're working in conservation. But the interesting thing is that they do that outside of the workplace. So it's kind of something that you would do outside of what you're contractually employed to do, if you're happy in your job. I don't know why. Okay. So what's kind of interesting if we look at the Kruger context, so most of our staff are from within, even less than that probably, but within 50 kilometers of our western boundary. We've got 2,400 people working in Kruger. If we look at the number of people that are directly employed to do community engagement in Kruger, it's 1% of our staff. Firstly, that's insane. If you think that they are working in an area the same size as the park, and we've got about 680 rangers working in the park. So we've got, I think there's 13 people working in people on conservation, 5 of which do community engagement next to Kruger. Okay, that's an insanely little number of people. But we've got 2,400 staff that live and work in these areas. There's a map, that's a sort of a hometown map of our Kruger ranges, just the ranges, 680 ranges. Each dot is a village or a town where we've got staff, and the bigger the dot, the larger the number of people. But you can see we've got people everywhere. And the point is just if we were able to manage all of our staff in a way that led to OCB, then we'd be able to leapfrog ourselves in terms of building support and engaging positively in this organizational mandate. So just to kind of add on that, Nelly, how's it looking, time-wise? Okay, Nelly and I have got a deal. Involves bribery, but I'm assuming no one's going to judge me. So I just want to talk a little bit about linking to the staff stuff is this work that was done by WWF on wildlife crime. So as you know, that's a big concern and a big threat for conservation across the globe. But what they used some lessons from criminology to try and understand why people become involved in crime, and in our context, it's wildlife crime. So the bottom line is that crime is not always perpetrated by bad people, but by people who are exposed to risk and who are not resilient. So it's this idea of resilience. So what leads to resilience? So drivers of low resilience are income inequality, oops, we saw the map earlier, financial and emotional insecurity, exposure to violence and trauma, limited opportunities, frustration, disrupted social structures. Okay, so those things lead to low resilience. What leads to high resilience? Being able to access employment and educational opportunities, living in a functional society, not experiencing violence, having strong social bonds, and people that are socially and emotionally invested in their own lives and in the future of their community. So these, to me, are critical kind of criteria to look at when we're doing community engagement through the context of conservation, because we need to look at this resilience lens. So how are all these different things that we are doing contributing to people's resilience? So once again, it's not just about the fact that people are poor. A lot of the crime, and wildlife crime is blamed on poverty, but it's actually not just about poverty. Poor people don't necessarily go into crime. It's actually people that are not as resilient and have been exposed to some of these other factors. Okay. Okay, sustainable resource use can be a valuable tool for conservation. How is it feeling? Am I feeling like I'm polarizing? It was like, sure, but after that polarizing talk, I was like, sure, how do you say this? Anyway, so sustainable resource use, I'm a pusher when it comes to sustainable resource use. So this is a project I just want to go through with you quickly. There we go. So pepperbark tree, who's heard of it? Yay. Okay, well, I'm so glad that actually some people haven't, because otherwise it would be boring, the next few slides. So this is a very important traditional medicine in southern Africa, and it gets used to cure a whole lot of different things, but it is endangered. It's on the red list, and there's not that very many of them left. And it's, we've got a small population in Kruger, and it was getting illegally harvested. So you can see why it's endangered. It's an amazing product, and it gets used to heal all sorts of things, and that's why it's very popular. It's basically like 𝐆𝐴, some of you might be familiar with. So those are trees inside Kruger, and you can see that they are quite severely harvested. So we started a project in 2009, firstly we put rangers in the field to protect the trees. They don't run around like the rhino, so it was quite easy. But then we realized, well, I mean, what's the point of that? We need to be able to share this resource because it's really important to people. So we started propagating, engaging with our traditional healers. The idea was that we would work together to develop some sort of project that could benefit them, but also enable us to save the plant. And we propagated these by the 1,000 over the years and engaged with them in lots of different workshops and did lots of different distributions of these trees. All up and down the park. You can see there's the map. So each one of those dots is a village next to Kruger, and each one has got between kind of 10 and 300 𝐷𝐵𝐽𝐽 in the traditional healer homes. And people are using them, they take them home and they plant them and so on. We go and monitor the trees to see if they've survived and chat to people about how it's all going. There's one of the ladies who got one of the very first trees, and that's her standing over there, and that's her tree. That was in 2022. So what we know is that the trees are being used, and they have resulted in a reduced demand for the wild harvested tissue. Oops, okay. Oops, I think this is going a little flat. Oh, maybe my finger's on the top. Guys, don't put your finger over the front. Awesome, awesome. Glad I could share that. Okay, so very good survival rates, 83%. We've distributed 40,000 trees, and there's an amazing survival rate of these plants. They're actually quite hard to die. I'm not sure why they're endangered. Many people, so everybody's been using them. All the traditional healers use them at home. Many people have switched from using bark to leaves, and most people used to buy but don't buy them anymore. Okay. So we won't talk about that. We're doing this for other species now as well. Wild ginger, you may know, of 𝐆𝐵𝐿𝐵𝐿𝐵, and a couple of other species as well. We've also started a project where we're distributing elephant dung. It's also very important traditional medicine in our area, in fact, in many areas. And flip, we've got a lot, and we've got a lot of elephants, and it's very doable in terms of sustainability for us. So we engaged with our healers to find out if that would be useful, how they would like us to harvest the dung and so on. And we're then able to share this with them in SANParks branded bags. Okay, this time I don't have my finger over the top. Okay, so just a quick, I've got a few little anecdotal ones just to kind of finish off. Oh, I say finish off, but you're okay. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. So this is just a little lesson learned through the Human-Wildlife Conflict Program, where we compensate for cattle that have been killed by lions. It's a major discussion point at meetings. It's a major issue. In work that we've done, many people perceive this to be a big disadvantage of living next to Kruger, but actually only about 12% of people have incurred a direct loss. So it's a massive deal, but it's something that we felt was a low-hanging fruit in terms of what we could sort out. And so we started a compensation program. I'm battling to get this thing. Okay, but the point is it took us 2 years to negotiate the terms and conditions with the livestock farmers. So when I say you go slow and you go together, that's the point. And we've got to accept that that's how it is if you want to go with people, if you want to take people along the journey. But it's definitely worth it for these sort of projects because it's really about collective decision making in terms of the sustainability of them. So that's the payments over time. But once again, I think the point is that it's not just about the cow. It's not just about the 5,000, although now we pay 7 for a cow. It's about the fact that we decided together how we were going to implement this project, and people have been part of the process. It's not without its challenges, so let me not go into those at this stage. Numbers count, but it's not always the big things that matter. Environmental education programs, lots of different ones. Lots of children participate, short programs, long programs, sort of different, obviously a lot more children participate in the shorter programs, a lot fewer children in the longer programs, but you've got to kind of do everything. And there's obviously going to be trade-offs. Just an example of the Kids in Parks program you might have heard of. What is the objective? To promote a conservation ethic in the youth of South Africa by responding to environmental issues through the support of environmental education. What are some of the most valuable outcomes? So remember, that's the official objective. Some of the highest value of the program is still placed on the accommodation, the availability of warm showers, a bed, as well as the staff attention to the children's needs. So as much as the green block is about our objectives, this is what the take home is from the kids. And those are the sort of important things to remember, that it's not always about what you sort of think it's going to be about at the beginning. Okay, so I'm going to skip through this little section on meat. I won't have time to tell you about the awesome stuff we're doing on meat, but just to show you, we do meat distribution, and there's also very positive impacts in terms of community relations and perceptions. And we've had to deal with quite a bit of media backlash, which we have done, I think, but it's a continual journey, and we've just got to keep working on it, and that's why the polarization discussion the other day was pretty useful and interesting for us in terms of this big sort of sustainable use debate. Ooh, I'm sure I get more time because this is taking long. I'm not going to talk about that, and I think this was just some interesting support we gave to the traditional healers during COVID, but all I want to show you, guys, this is really not tapping me over, is that it wasn't just about the mask. So just read that bottom message. I think this was really meaningful to me at the time where we were sending SMS messages to the traditional healers during level 5 of lockdown. And people just said, you know, we're so happy to get the messages. It means that you remember us. So that's another impact. So who would have thought it wasn't just about that? It was actually being remembered at a time when actually government had forgotten about our traditional healers. So Sandparks Week is my last example. And just also some work, it's been to try and promote positive opportunities for people to visit parks. We know a lot of people come in, but we weren't really sure why and if they enjoyed themselves. So we did a bit of work with Sandparks Week last year as well as this year, chatted to people that were visiting just to get a better idea of why they're coming in. This is just really cute. This was a little couple that came in from Lulakani area. This was the first time we're coming by ourselves. The previous times we've come with friends who drove, and today we drove ourselves. They were so excited to be part of it, being able to come and drive around in Kruger. We know people are local. What was quite interesting, just to point out that 18%. So only 18% of the people I interviewed were coming for the first time. So there's definitely been an uptake in terms of visitation over the last couple of years. Our oldest visitor, I'm nearly finished, really. Remember our deal. I wonder if I must try that way. This was our oldest visitor from last year. He was 104. And it turns out that our participating visitors are not that concerned about the impact of Sandparks Week. The non-participants are the ones that stay overnight. Okay, these are the last slides. Does research make a difference to saving biodiversity? I had a quick look at the abstracts. Don't worry about this, don't worry about that. But there's just a little model where you can look at the type of research that's taking place. So are people looking at understanding a threat, or are they looking at the way in which we're responding to a threat? And it seems that based on global kind of literature, the more, if there's at least about 30% of your research happening on this bottom area, then you're probably going to make a good impact in terms of saving biodiversity. That's very much in a nutshell. These guys based it on 700 papers, and the idea is that you should be looking at about 30%. What are we? So I've looked at some of the conferences. So there's the global standard. They say is about 30% looking at responses. The ZSSA conference was at around 18. The science networking meeting was at about 20. 𝐵𝐚𝐺 was at about 41, those of you that know 𝐵𝐚𝐺. And GRIN has got the highest at about 56. So I think it's pretty amazing in terms of the stuff that's getting presented and done at GRIN, and I think it's got a huge, and that's why you have your managers here, and I think that says quite a lot about this as a conference. So just to finish off with this quote, oh, I can see it, you can't. So if conservation biology or conservation science becomes isolated, it'll be of little use, and its prescriptions won't be informed by the real world problems of the people who are most affected.